Hi there! In this lesson, we're going to get into the fun part, actually drawing the rhino. And we're going to begin with the realistic style. So let's go. To start, create a new layer for the sketch and select a brush. I'm using number 36 with some adjustments that you can see in the brush property panel. These adjustments give me a stroke that's similar to a pencil, as you can see here. I've left the references because we'll need them when we start drawing. So just like we did in the exercises earlier, we're going to draw, this time on a blank canvas and not tracing, the main shapes of the rhino. This time, try to be more careful with the shapes so they look as close as possible to the rhino. You need to make sure that the proportions are correct and they don't get deformed so that we keep that realistic style. The large volumes we drew in the previous lesson aren't enough, and we need to subdivide the shapes a lot more. The more time you dedicate to this process, the more precise and realistic your drawing will look. Obviously, we don't have to know all of the lines, just the ones that allow us to include the main structures. In this phase, we'll add the eyes and the facial muscles, as well as the horns, ears, and legs, basically everything that gives us more information about our animal. Draw with care and patience. A realistic style requires a lot of attention and technique. Although I'm using lots of references from the photo, like the position, for example, I'm not copying. What I'm doing is trying to respect the dimensions and proportions of the rhino and represent these in my drawing by taking elements from the photos. You could use more references if you wanted to, but I think that 2 is enough for now. You may have noticed that up to now we've been working from the side of the animal. This is because the main shapes and basic structures are understood better from this perspective. However, for a more minute or precise drawing, we would need to study the animal from every angle. We would break down the head, torso, and legs, and we'd study the muscles and substructures that contain everything. Try it out on your own and see how you'll start to master the anatomy of many different animals with this technique. And just like any other drawing process, I've created a new layer to continue sketching the rhino. On each new layer, we'll add more level of detail and precision. I don't think that we need more than 3 layers, but you can experiment with as many as you like, whatever suits your way of working. As you'll see, I'll move the references every now and then so I can always see them, and so they don't bother me when I'm drawing. I'll always reference nature, whether that be from a real object or a photo, if I don't know how to draw a rhino from my imagination. I think if I had a blank canvas with no references at all, I wouldn't even know where to begin. So don't think you need to know everything to be able to draw. The great masters always use references and observe nature to create their art, and you'll do exactly the same. Don't be afraid and study nature. You'll see that this way the knowledge will slowly become stored in your mind and the drawing process will get easier and easier. Although we've done a previous study process, it's still important to keep on studying and analysing during the entire process. By this, I mean that while you draw your animal, you need to observe it again and again to find the substructures inside what you've drawn to really understand why one thing is connected to another or why you draw a line in a specific area. Any line you draw should be there because there are muscles and bones that can be seen through the skin. Even areas of fat, like around the knees, that have their own volume. It's good that you study the shape of these muscles and bones to know why you're seeing that particular line on your model and where to draw it. Remember this point well because it's important that we don't draw random lines. Everything should be logical and organised. You'll also see that in my drawing, I overlap some lines over others. I don't just do this because I feel like it. It has a reason behind it. The aim of drawing lines like this is to show muscles and joints that go on top of each other. So we need to explain this in our drawing too, so that the viewer can understand what we're trying to say at a glance. So as you can see, I've created another layer where I'm now doing the definitive drawing and the line art. In this phase, I'm specifying the shapes better and deciding which elements to keep and which ones to discard. There might be lines I've drawn that I'm not too sure about, or areas that are a bit chaotic and nothing is really defined. So this is the step where we define all these areas. Being precise in a realistic drawing is not the only thing that's important. The stroke and the way you make it is another part of the process. You should draw the strokes with care, looking for nice or effective styles. If you don't know where to start, see how other artists do it, and try to copy some of them. Elements that add a nice effect to your drawing are creases or cuts. These enrich the realism of the design. Before, we spoke about modifying shapes if we know the main structure, but now is not really the time to do that. We are doing a realistic drawing and we should keep the proportions as close to reality as possible. This is a very meticulous job, where we're very focused on the technique. The result could look amazing working in this style, but don't try to alter the reality at this stage. Stick with what you can see, and the results will be very impressive. So I don't overload my drawing. I prefer not to draw all the creases in the rhino's skin. In the photo, you see that it does have a lot, but I like it to look a little lighter, so I just draw the ones that I think are the most interesting. The drawing is going to work the same, as I've kept the proportions throughout the process, so experiment with more or less detail. An important part of the stage is the texture. Textures are very important when we're doing a realistic drawing, as they tell us what material each element is made out of. In this case, the rhino has thick and rough skin. It has horns made out of bone and it has hair in his ears. We need to represent these textures with the strokes that we make. It's important to identify the textures correctly in our drawing. This way, we won't need to shade to show the viewer what our rhino is made out of. They'll have most of the information by observing the line. If you don't know how to draw the textures, look for references of different materials and try to copy them. You can also look for work by other artists to see how they represent different textures. When doing the line art, we barely need any references. If you've drawn the lines correctly, you only need to trace them. So I'm going to use the same brush I used to sketch, only this time I'll remove the ink flow and I'll increase the opacity to the maximum. That way we get a nice clean stroke. What I like about this brush is that the stroke is a little broken and it has transparency properties, so you can play around with it a little bit. But try out different brushes and find the one that you like and that adapts to your style. So what I'm going for in this drawing is a line that's thicker in the shaded areas and thinner in the lighter ones. I'll also make some shadows with fine lines as I go along that I'll draw in the direction of the rhino's shape. I'll only do this in certain areas where I think it might look interesting. If I need more intensity, I can fill with black or crossed lines. But be careful if you want to do this, you don't want your drawing to look too messy. Finally, I'll draw some lines to represent the cast shadow next to the legs. This trick makes the rhino look like it's standing on a solid surface and not floating in the air. It might seem a little silly, but I think it improves the result considerably. So after quite a long process, our realistic rhino is finished. I think the result of a realistic drawing like this is a kind of elegance that's hard to achieve in other styles. But it also allows us to study the structures of the element in depth to then be able to adapt to whatever style we like. So in the next lesson, we'll draw our cartoon rhino, and you'll see it's really, really fun. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did, and I'll see you in the next lesson.